All right, good morning everyone. We're going to first hear from Linus. He's going to present some findings around the IDC report, which I think was sort of shared with everyone. If you haven't had a chance to read it, that's okay. We're sort of going to summarise that and hear a little bit more about it. So with that, I'm going to ask Linus to please come up and present the findings.
Thanks, Aidan, and thank you everyone. So happy to be here. When Vishal approached me a couple of months ago and he said, Linus, let's do something around open source research, right? And the impact on developer productivity, I said that is a fantastic idea. Because in my opinion, that kind of research wasn't done before. We know developers use open source, but for the longest time, we were not able to quantify the benefits, right, to developers. So I'll run through some of the research findings with you today. I know some of you reached out to me as well personally, for those who are listening to the recording, but we'll be able to send you a link as well. We're going to start on the premise that, from a digital innovation perspective, most enterprises now see themselves as software factories, right? We know the term and we recognize how, as enterprises, in order to drive digital innovation, they actually have to drive new IP. Right? And the further up the stack you go, right, when you're trying to differentiate yourselves in the industry, the more you have to differentiate. You can't just rely on packaged software, right, to drive differentiation. If everyone's using the same packaged software, then what's the difference? And another marker that we use in IDC is the percentage of revenue that comes from digital products, services, and experiences. So here in Australia, in most of the industries, including government as well as healthcare, we're now tracking about 20 to 30% of revenue that's attributed to digital products, services, and experiences. Interesting, isn't it? And we think that only by about 3 to 4 years' time, that could actually increase to 40, 50%. Now, how you run a business, right, when you are half of your revenue, attributed to these types of services and experiences is going to be very, very different. And I'll explain to you from the CIO 50 and from the advisory boards that we sit on how organizations are thinking about it, right? They're thinking first and foremost about how digital business models can evolve, For example, a direct-to-consumer model or a subscription model, right? You've seen EVs as a subscription right now among two of the largest energy retailers. You're also seeing, at the same time, in parallel, right, operating model transformation as well, because obviously you can't be doing the same thing that you've been doing, right, and expect the same results, right, particularly in the digital space when it comes to real-time, again, services and experiences, and of course the organization model as well. And what's very interesting this time around in our research is the one in the center, which is a digital business platform, right? Maybe about 5, 6 years ago, organizations would say, yes, I'm building my digital business platform, right, on a cloud provider or on a cloud platform. That was pretty much the sophistication you could get at that time. Today, most enterprises are very articulate with their shareholders and their stakeholders, and not just within IT, on how to build a digital business platform, right, to deliver the right capabilities for your business, whether it's in payments, banking, industry, again, healthcare, hospitals, even aged care. Aged care has transformed over the last 6 months because of the Royal Commission, and now we're thinking a lot about robotics, IoT, and even video awareness. So no matter which industry you belong to, right, again, you'll be less reliant on packaged software and more reliant on driving, right, these sorts of differentiation, in digital business use cases, and particularly impacting on business models and operating model change as well. These are going to drive the differentiation in the marketplace as well, which leads me to the topic of open source, right? Where does open source stand in all of this? In our research that we do every year, and we do this tracking every year, and the way to read this chart is the majority of new apps, right, particularly those that have been developed over the last 12 or so months, all right, and for the majority of new projects as well, how much of these methodologies, components, capabilities are being used right now, right, for production-ready capability. Low-code, no-code, serverless, open source components, application containerization. You could almost say anywhere between 20 to 40 to 50% even of all projects now rely on these frameworks and methodologies. So I wouldn't have time to go into all of the results, but you can download it, and there's hard copies here as well. But let me just highlight some of the key findings from the research. Firstly, the benefits that the developers expect with open source technologies is in the area of driving digital innovation, right? A lot of the new classes of applications that we see today, rely on open source components. In some cases, some of the banks here have been very public to say even up to 17 or 18 open source components to deliver, right, the mobile application. We're now entering into an era of generative AI, and that's open source AI helping developers be even more productive by helping writing some code, for example. Okay? And easy integration with environments, improving developer productivity. These are very specific results from Australia. The report that you can download is across the whole of Asia, so these differ from the results that you see in the report. Where are the business benefits, right? And the top benefit was in lowering the software development cost, as well as the faster cadence of new products and services offerings. So standardization has become such an important factor, right, when you do cloud-native app dev, right? You talk about, we've got Microsoft here, but you could be doing, app dev on other platforms as well. And one of the things that open source affords us is the ability to drive standardization right once, right? And of course deploy right consistently across multiple platforms. And I can't think, and I don't know if you even want to put up your hand or afford to even venture, right? Have you ever tried to do it without open source is the question, right? And let's, I see a lot of people agreeing, right? The number one benefit, right, associated with open source is enhanced security. Well, that's interesting, right? Because we've seen, press, we've seen some negative press, we've seen some positive press. But by and large, right, most developers agree that by using open source technologies, right, the code is open for review, and particularly now that we live in, again, that era of third-party software supply chain risk, right, that has balled up to be one of the top 3 risks, right, that board of directors here particularly are very concerned with. There's a lot of eyes on it, eyes on code. Now, obviously if you're partnering with a vendor, right, who stands behind the open source, then the code review and obviously the assurances, right, just get ramped up, right, from a support and capability perspective as well. There's also greater resiliency and cross-cloud portability as well, right? So it does have impact, right, on these very important factors. The Critical Infrastructure Act, for example, is coming into force right now here in Australia. The ability to deliver, if you're running at, say, 40% of your revenue from digital product services and experience, you have to think about resiliency in a new way, right? Because you are now tasked with delivering critical services, right, in the digital space. In Melbourne, for example, we've seen the first remote ICU capability, totally remote, right? And their resiliency takes a new meaning because it's not, an e-commerce transaction that goes down, right? It's somebody's life at stake, right, on the other end as well. So this is how I think the Critical Infrastructure Act is going to impact on resiliency as well. So, where is it most likely going to be deployed, right? Again, in security, I'll go into a little bit of detail in my finishing slide. Internet of Things, progressive web apps, etc. Right? And this is Australia only, so we're using it for new technology areas like IoT, 5G, AR, VR, and of course generative AI, right? And AI ML capabilities. In fact, that one there, which is the AI, is it's going to rise up the ranks. In Asia, that's already number 2. That's already number 2 where open source is yielding the most benefits. And I know, thank you so much for the questions you sent in before. Some of you, you know who you are, put in the questions, right? How do we use it? How do we use these new AI capabilities? From a security perspective, there are, as you go through the whole dev life cycle, right? There's obviously going to be very many, points where you're going to look at security, right, from a dev life cycle perspective, right? And I can tell you from each of these areas as well, open source has, become such a large play, and that's why it wasn't a surprise to me that open source, security was actually one of the areas, right, that benefited from the use of open source. So, Vishal is going to speak a little bit more about this, so I won't steal his thunder, and I'll conclude here, and thank you so much for your time. The report's, available for you. Just know that we're now driving, right, technology to compete in industries, and the use of open source technologies in this research piece is extremely fundamental and instrumental to driving digital innovation and transformation outcomes. Thanks so much.